everyone. Welcome to the new year. Woo. Yay! Yeah, it's 2020. Yeah. Okay. So the first item on the agenda is maybe to recognize and acknowledge public comment. So
You just open it up to anybody, but I don't think that there's anyone here
we
for
are
public
open
comment.
for public comment. And
Come on
nothing. Okay, so we're good to move on then?
Yes.
Everybody witnessed this? Okay, we're good? Okay, so let's move on to the minutes. And those are the minutes from October 10th, 2019. Any edits, remarks, corrections? We're good? Is there a motion?
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion?
Second.
Second. Okay, all those in favor signify with an aye.
Aye.
And a nay, the same sign. Okay, very good. And an abstention, sorry, thank you. That's right. Thank you. Okay, we're going to just move right into the agenda. So we've got a presentation. And I don't know how you want to do the introductions, but we're glad to meet Officer Roden tonight and look forward to hearing from you. So we'll go ahead and get started. Do we need introductions or a transition or?
Probably just be more of an introduction for tonight than actually a presentation.
Sure, an introduction, and let's talk about, how, why we, from our past discussions, and maybe at the last meeting, and some of our discussions about what we would like to have happen going forward, why we have Amber here tonight too.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll first address those. Is kind of backtracking is working with you folks to identify outreach into any portions of the community. It's been mentioned about reaching out to the LGBTQ community. I do know that the chief was coincidentally in relying on past practice at the previous department, they had an LGBTQ liaison. And so with the needs or the requests of the board, and then also sort of the chief's, I won't say experience with the topic, he had requested to identify any employees that may or may not be interested, and ultimately Officer Roden was selected. And so her role here today is really just to introduce herself and give her a very brief, more about her resume, exactly how this position looks or its functions and roles. One, I always say we're open to suggestions, but sort of the program in and of itself or what that's done, we don't quite have the answer to that yet. Does that make sense? So
Sure.
I do know that Amber's gone and shadowed a diversity officer or something of the like in Kansas City, Missouri. And so we're going to be probably fact-finding and trying to identify exactly how it's going to look. It'll probably take some time too.
Sure, thank you. And along with that, I guess I just want to refresh, and this is just purely with my memory, on some conversations that we had last year, because we did have a presentation from another officer who gave a report about all the outreach that was done. I think that was when we were over on 19th Street. That report was there. And I think what grew out of that presentation was, okay, it's great to be out there, but what are we doing more explicitly to really do outreach to underserved populations, those that experience disparity in the community, so on and so forth. So I believe this fits and dovetails into that. So it's more work that we are interested in working with you on to meet that outreach outcome that you would like to achieve.
And without a doubt, and it's always kind of my sales pitch, it doesn't just because we've done this or have accomplished this, doesn't mean that we're done here. So
Sure.
if anybody else has any other ideas, or hey, you have the contact information, ultimately we can have also those, you got the chiefs, and so We're always open to ideas.
Yeah, well, I really like the fact that you're doing a little research and looking at what other precincts and groups are doing with regard to addressing issues of inclusion and diversity in communities.
You articulate it much better than I do, so thank you.
All right, well, we're glad to have Amber here, so Amber.
Yeah, Amber Roden. I've been with the Lawrence Police Department for 11 years. Currently assigned to the department's mental health team for the past 3 years, engaging the population of the mental health, substance use disorder, some kind of crisis community is my current role. Me and Susan Hadel, who's a co-responder with Bert Nash, engage folks in some kind of crisis with hopes to get them connected to services, stay engaged in services, if and when we can, avoiding the criminal justice system when it's appropriate. Not always that appropriate at times, but when we can. That has been my kind of path for the past several years. In 2014, I helped create and implement the Douglas County CIT Council. And then...
What is that?
Crisis Intervention Team Council.
Okay.
And then after that, I was the president of the State CIT Association. Same kind of role. CIT then was implemented in Douglas County with the 40-hour training across law enforcement and our community first responders and of like. So I've kind of been in that role for several years of engaging that population. Me as a person, I'm in a same-sex relationship, so the LGBTQ liaison position was obviously I don't want to say a need for me, but an easy path for me to engage with that population. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm wanted in that community. Having that trust with the specific groups and the diverse populations in this role is going to be important. So with that is why I kind of touched base with the KCMO officer, Officer Kim Schott Ellis, and she has created the LGBTQ liaison position there. Her suggestion to the chief and kind of why we somewhat double dutied the name of it was as a diversity officer. Not just, we don't know the need in our community for a specific LGBTQ liaison officer. That position may not need that much engagement, but all the diverse populations are then able to have some kind of contact within the department and hopefully be trusted for the need and what we can do within the community and our department.
Okay.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Amber.
Here's,
Yeah.
I'm gonna go to here's your business cards.
Do you have
Let's pick them up because everyone's on the floor.
So Amber, so what got you interested in becoming a law enforcement officer and then moving into these areas in terms of
Thank you so much.
working in crisis situations and mental health? And
Of course you would ask that because you know my family. So kind of engaging with this population within the community, obviously being a law enforcement officer, I want to help people in need. That's the easy answer that most officers are going to provide to you. Working with the folks that may not be able to speak for themselves during a crisis, after a crisis, as well as those that don't feel comfortable coming forward. That's kind of me as a human and the path I came from with my family. I have mental illness in my family, I have substance use in my family, I've got suicide, transgender, interracial. It's all in my family. But again, that doesn't mean that I'm accepted within these roles in the community. So having been in domestic violence homes, all kinds of stuff like that, I can relate to them as a human, and hopefully that can be more accepting to those folks within the community on a human level, not just as an officer.
Thank
that's
you.
very cool. And I really love the fact that you say just because I have these experiences doesn't mean that A, I know everything, which I kind of heard in there, but also that automatically assumes that you're accepted
Yes.
in those communities. So that's very respectful. I acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Do you have any reason to think that you wouldn't be accepted?
Not necessarily, but just the social aspect of just because I have a transgender friend or because I am in a same-sex relationship is not necessarily make it accepting to everybody. For me to assume makes a big ego behind it. My story is different than everybody else's story. I can relate on a personal level, but it doesn't mean that our stories are the same and that my outcome is going to be the same as everybody else's outcome.
But do you believe those experiences allow you to meet folks where they are?
Yes, yes.
But I have a couple of things. So you mentioned Kim Shaw?
Kim
Ellis?
Shaw Ellis?
Okay, with KCMO.
Yes.
Do they do any kind of training with like the employees of Kansas City, Missouri, or obviously with the police department for diversity, LGBTQ, that type of thing?
Yes, yes. Officer Kim Shaw Ellis has been involved in her department. She kind of does a double duty as their diversity officer, and she's also permanently assigned to their academy instructor. So they do diversity and inclusion. They also do fair and impartial policing, as well as specific to LGBTQ in the academy, as well as outreach within her department. She also specifically goes out and does training outside in the community to businesses, community groups, things of that nature.
Nice. So I'm kind of segue into that because, I don't know kind of where you are with the role or where you're wanting to go yet for an agenda, so to speak. But are you looking at the training aspect to do some of the same?
Yes, and so currently in our department, we do fair and impartial policing. Officer Serena Robb has been on that role right now. I know currently that for more instructors, it's open. So knowing that, but also some of that is set by KLETC standards. So what that looks like, if we can expand on it, things like that are still open for the department to figure out and see what we want to do.
Okay. I have provided a couple of names within the community.
Yes.
And you probably have those, right?
Yes.
I mean, I know Jay is on the Human Rights Commission and stuff. So he and I talked recently. He's excited to work with you.
Yes.
So not pushing or anything, but just, definitely to help get that going. You know him?
Yes.
Okay. So he's amazing in doing training with folks and such. So yeah,
On a
great.
side topic, you had mentioned that Jay was working with Tony Wheeler on citywide training. And I know that ultimately I could speak with Tony about that, but do you even know if that's still progressing or?
Briefly, we actually talked at New Year's,
Gotcha.
and he said that they haven't really gotten very far with that, but I know that he's trying to get that implemented.
Okay.
So he's hoping to connect in order to maybe, segue some things together there. He's so good at it.
Very good.
So, what else? There's something else I was going to ask you. And you have both those names. The other thing, and this is going to kind of come out of left field probably, but I know back in November there was an article in the paper that talked about the city dropped its ranking in LGBTQ inclusion. So I just want a little bit of an idea of what your thoughts are, or if you've worked towards something. I don't know really what all the city does. I tried to read more on that, but it's kind of limited what I could access. It looks like in 17 we were the highest in Kansas, then dropped back in 18, and then back up a little bit, and we're third in ranking. But anyway, I just wonder kind of what your thoughts are on.
So I think depending on the department structure and how much time is allotted to be able to do this in an intentional role is going to be kind of what we set for the department and what that looks like. We don't know if it's part-time. At this time, it's just said it's part-time, and what my assignment will be, so that time dedicated to it is unknown at this time. Obviously, intentionally engaging those populations, as well as the research, that's the same thing I'm doing, trying to get in touch with transformations, in touch with, what kind of pride community do we have here in town? What does all of that look like to make where we can make it all together, instead of just, maybe a contact here, and finding it centrally located and get everybody
Sure.
kind of in the same path. That's, in my dream world, what that would look like.
Gotcha. And I'm absolutely willing to assist if some, for contacts or whatever. So I appreciate you being here.
Yes, thank you.
Fair to ask, how could we, as a group, help the city become a better community from your perspective?
From my perspective, within law enforcement or within this role specifically?
More the diversity perspective. Could we help?
I know one thing that the chief has mentioned, again, like Sergeant Ernst had said from his previous employment, is there's a program called Safe Harbor, Safe Place. Simple thing is posting a sticker around public places that make it a safe place for the LGBTQ population to be able to stop in, help contact law enforcement, and keep them safe should they come in and they know that's a safe place for them to be until law enforcement can arrive and take their report, get them to a safe place, things of that nature. From there, it's just going to I think, be a community effort and intentional on media, social media, and saying, hey, this is what we're focusing on as a community together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is a little bit along the lines of what Stephanie was raising about questions of inclusion and fairness in relationships with the police department. Are you familiar with that Allegro study that was done here? I guess it was last year, maybe.
Yes.
Do you have any thoughts about that study? I mean, I think we all know that it wasn't particularly well done. There are a lot of methodological flaws in that study, and yet it raised the question of whether or not the LGBTQ community has reason to trust the police. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I guess my personal opinion is that we don't necessarily know the need yet, as well as just gaining their trust. I think there's a lot of mistrust with law enforcement nationally. So when it's a specific study towards a race or a certain population, it's going to kind of seem misguided, is what I will say, of do we have a problem? We don't really know until we get out there and engage that population if that's a local issue or if it's a national issue that we don't necessarily have any way to gauge what's going on locally. So it's not a real answer to your question.
Do you intend to get out there and find out if there is a real problem?
My hope is yes, with that intentional community relationship, that's my hope, is to find out what kind of problem, if there is a problem within our community. Yes.
Any other questions, comments? So the chief was here at our last meeting, correct?
Mhm.
And he did indicate in his presentation to us his desire to work toward, in what way, I don't know, but and maybe I've forgotten, but really making an effort to talk about the need to be more intentional and more deliberate in thinking about how is it that we want to access a variety of different populations in Lawrence. And so I don't think you're solely responsible for that, so I want to acknowledge that too. But it would be helpful going forward to get some updates on what's going on with that, so we can learn and understand about that, and then inform and then share or assist in any way that we can going forward too. But this is good to know and to hear tonight.
Absolutely. I would also encourage, I started actually this discussion a year ago, and here we have Amber standing right here talking about the LGBT community, and I actually initiated that piece of it. So we have lots of marginalized groups, so I would encourage our board here to come forward, for different groups.
Absolutely.
Any other comments, questions?
Madam Chair, just an additional comment. So I think that we talked about asking Sergeant Rhodes to come back at your next meeting to talk a little bit about the 2019 outreach. We just weren't quite ready with this meeting here. But we can summarize that and then also have a discussion about kind of what their plans are for 2020. And I think with regard to the question that one of you had, what can this board do? I think one of the things that we do kind of acknowledge that we don't have all the contacts that you all have. So as you, and you all have done a great job of saying, these are some suggested ideas or people that we should engage with. And I just encourage you to continue to mention those, and we will make sure to put those in the right channels. I did want to mention the national rankings that you had mentioned. I don't know all the details, but someone in our office, the other assistant city manager, works on those rankings, and that could be something I could ask her to provide a report and some of the details about some of the questions, but I do understand that designating certain liaisons, like Officer Roden, will be one of those things that is one of the boxes. Of course, you know, that doesn't always mean everything, just being able to check a box, but it will be able to give you an idea of maybe some other things that we would try to do.
Amber, do you know, isn't it HRC scoring? Is that how they do you know? Do they do it by Human Rights Commission scoring?
I believe so.
I think so, okay.
I'm sorry, I don't know enough details, but I can,
Okay.
I'll bring a report back, and then it'll show you the actual questions that we've answered, and then what we're lacking on.
Can we possibly get 2 or 3 years? It looks like it goes back, 17 was really strong.
Yes.
To see how in comparison. That'd be
Yes,
great.
and I think it may be somewhat with regard to how they changed some of the criteria over the years, as opposed to us not doing things we were doing before, because to me that wouldn't make sense. But I'll get you a report on that at your next meeting.
Awesome, thank you.
Along with that, just a little, so have we looked at a demographic profile of Lawrence? Have we done that? I
Last
can't
time.
remember. Did we do that?
At
Yes.
least the officers.
The officers?
Produced a city demographic.
Yes, and compared to
By
officers.
race and,
Yes.
okay, age, okay.
Not age, did not do age.
Okay.
And also, this is kind of parlay on everything here, is even with Sergeant Rose's update, is it's going to be somewhat identical to last year's of our outreach, because some of this is once again identifying different community leaders, et cetera. And we're limited, one, and we have one public affairs officer, and then we have a public, and they do a lot of, actually with the media stuff. Of course, we have officers out on patrol and officers interacting, so back to your question, and someone even repeating what Diane said, is people said, hey, I know this is a leader of this group over here, or this is a good group over here. I've repeated this over and over, and that's going to be invaluable information.
Yep.
And also, when it comes to trust, is no matter Officer Roden's life experiences, my life experience, the captain or any officers, is there sometimes is already an erosion, if not an absence of trust, merely showing up in a police uniform. And so if you have somebody that does not trust the police, and ideally could vouch for one of us, maybe, I don't know, and say, hey, let me get you in touch with somebody who I do trust, and it doesn't have to be me or anybody here, that's also invaluable, because the biggest thing I think we can do to, whether it be solve crime, solve crime and ultimately make community safer, is have people trust the police and willing to talk to the police so we can address those issues. Because unfortunately, right, wrong, or indifferent, no matter how somebody perceives the police or appreciates the police, if they are being victimized, the only way, potentially one of the only ways to resolve that, you know, as far as getting somebody prosecuted and incarcerated, is by interacting with the police. So I'm not saying there's not other ways to solve a problem. The police are not the be-all, end-all, but I say we need your help. But really, those reports, we'll keep giving them. They're going to be virtually identical unless we get new information.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right,
Thank you so much, Amber.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda then would be a presentation on the body cameras from Captain Finley. Welcome.
Good evening. I've been asked to come in and just kind of give an overview of a new program that we have in the police department. It doesn't seem so new to me because we've been talking about this in concept since 2015. Under Chief Khatib, we started to move some of these things forward, put out some budget requests in 2016. I think body cameras are very expensive. I'll just put that out there. Most of these cameras, if they're done right and you're planning for long-term storage of data, it's just an expensive prospect. So when we first put that out to the City Commission and had that as an annual budget item, it was just, we just didn't have enough funding that particular year. So we repeated the process the following year in 2017, and that actually was funded in full by the city. And at the time, we estimated our initial cost of $462,000 for that program in 2017. So our budgets are kind of done mid-year. We start talking about that in earnest in April, May, and really it's not decided or finalized till August. However, in February of that same year, we knew that we'd be putting out this budget request. We identified a grant that was out there. And this is a Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Affairs support grant for agencies to get a body-worn camera program started. So we did two things kind of in parallel. We had our city budget request for 2017, but in February of 17, myself and a half dozen department members were kind of cobbled together to try to prepare a federal grant application. And all of us kind of looked at each other and said, oh boy, never done this before. So we had civilian staff, sworn staff, supervisors, and others kind of come together and talk about, hey, we believe this program is valuable. We may get it passed and fully funded with the city this year, but let's see if we can also get some federal funds to assist with that. So that process started in February of 17. In August of 17, the city fully funded that program, but the good news was about 60 days later, we got news that we also had received federal funding for that. So the federal funds provided us a match. So we had to match for that projected cost of $462,000. We had $231,000 of federal money, and we had $231,000 of city money. Now, when you're doing all these estimates, we're doing these in 2016 for what we think things will cost and what technology is out there and how much you need to store. And as we started to get closer and closer to actually looking at this and getting some good numbers, our cost estimates went way up. We also had looked originally from the perspective of only giving cameras to some people. In other words, the primary officer out on the street is the only one that's going to get a camera, and the other half of the department, we're not going to issue cameras to them. Even though they will have some duties out on the street, they just won't do it day to day. So it was kind of a thought process, and we bounced back and forth as to what we wanted to do. In the end, what we were able to do is get a body-worn camera system purchased for every officer, every sworn police officer on the department. Part of the thought behind that not only was these are not good to shuffle from officer to officer. It's a signed piece of equipment. It's got an electronic serial number and an owner in the system, and that's how all the videos and things are cataloged. And it became very labor intensive. And everybody said, oh, you don't want to try that. That is a bit of a mess. So the good thing is, again, everybody's got a camera system. So if we have a detective who's not normally in uniform and we need to assign them out to, let's say, a Final Four celebration, which we hope to have again one day soon, we're going to put a lot of people in uniforms that are not normally in uniforms. And I believe our city expects that we have those interactions, especially in that type of setting, recorded on our body-worn camera system. So that's a very long way to explain a little bit of the background about how we got there. So once we had secured our funding, we really started in the first part of 2018 to start looking at, okay, how do we want to approach this project? Who are our potential vendors? And how do we do this right? So we had seen several agencies do this and step into it, and then within a year or two, their product was no longer available. The company had gone bankrupt because this was an explosion of companies that wanted to jump into this new market because some departments were mandated to come out with the body-worn camera program by federal decree or otherwise, and so all these people wanted to jump into the game. So we looked at vendors, we looked at sustainability, we looked at what the best products were, and eventually we had 8 different vendors that were interested in selling this product to us that we looked like we reasonably wanted to take a look at those folks. They came in, they provided a presentation to us, we looked at their products and started to whittle that down to figure out which ones potentially were feasible. In other words, some of them had a battery life that would only last 2 hours. That's not going to work for a police officer that has a 10-hour shift. You can't just plan to go back to the station and swap out your battery or plug it in or things like that. So we brought our list of vendors from 8 to 3, and then when we got to those 3 vendors, we put those vendors through a full 30-day evaluation of their product. So we evaluated it in the field. We not only deployed it on every different shift, but we assigned it out to like training. Training had one so that they could go out to the range and they could practice like defensive tactics to see, will this thing fall off your body and land on the ground 9 times out of 10, because that's not good. We also had the ability to go out to the range and practice and see how the camera reacted to gunfire. Oddly enough, some microphones wouldn't even pick it up, even though it's an extremely loud noise. The frequency range or something about it caused it to just pretty much wash out of the audio. So we learned a lot through this test and evaluation process, and kind of put all those things through the paces. At the end of that essentially 90-day, a little bit longer than that process, we came back and Axon was the vendor that we ended up selecting. Axon is one of the top 2 or 3 vendors that are out there. They're very good at what they do. In my estimation, it's an expensive product, but we looked at reliability, we looked at whether or not we would last our shift, and then we looked at a variety of different things that had to do with back-end options. So for example, body camera videos is not good unless it's consistently available, the system doesn't fail you. You have to have a good back-end means of storing the data and organizing it so that when we have to find it for a prosecutor, especially during a formal discovery process, we can go out and locate those videos of all those officers that were on that call and be able to effectively and efficiently disseminate that off to prosecutors or to whoever we have to share that video with. So Axon was kind of the vendor for that. We also liked the setup that they had. We saw other cameras. We saw one camera that essentially was hidden behind your shirt. So all it had was like a tiny little hole that kind of looked like an oversized button that was in the center of your shirt. They literally had to modify our shirts for this test and evaluation process. But it was just a little lens, and otherwise you had no idea that that officer was wearing a body camera. That was one of the things too that we thought, number one, I don't really like to modify everybody's shirt because that's a process in and of itself. And number two, part of this is we want people to be able to see that we're actually wearing these cameras. Does it change behavior? Maybe it doesn't some. It's certainly not going to do that at all, but it shouldn't be a secret that we're out there wearing body cameras, recording interactions and things like that. So this was the product that we chose. This is affixed to my uniform by magnets. We saw some that kind of clipped and did a variety of other things, but there is a set of magnets that sits behind. This actually sticks to my vest too because I've got a big steel plate that sits behind there, so it's nicely mounted for me. But I'll pass that around so that you can kind of see what the product is. The other thing that we liked about this product was it was very easy to activate and deactivate. We don't want a product where you've got to push this button and hold it 3 seconds in order to get the camera to turn on. Because one of the things as administrators we certainly don't want is if we put out this expensive product and expect officers to go around wearing this, we want them to record their interactions. We don't want well, I tried to turn it on and it didn't turn on, or I pressed the stop button instead of the start button, and we saw some of them that had multiple buttons. So this was far and away the easiest for officers to activate. They press the button twice, it activates the camera, and then in order to turn it off, they have to push and hold it for several seconds, and they get some sort of a signal, beep, or flashing light that indicates that recording is stopped. It also vibrates too, so if we want it in a situation where it's not making noise or illuminating a situation, we can put it in this vibrate mode. So that's kind of how we chose the product, how we got to where we're at. I can talk a little bit about some of the expectations that we have for officers without going through the minutia of...
I might have,
That's all right.
Okay.
It's not even programmed or set up. In
it's a
fact,
real nice shot of Jane though.
What about that 30 seconds when it occurred?
yeah, well, in what Sergeant Ernst is referring to, one of the things we liked about this product is, let's say it's off and it's not recording anything. If something suddenly happens and the officer doesn't immediately reach down and activate the camera, truth be told, the thing is always recording. So it's recording and it's got 30 seconds that is a sliding scale of overwriting. So it's recording 30 seconds worth of data, and then when I hit start, I've not only got video, but at that point when I hit start, I will also have audio. But if somebody suddenly comes up when you're just at the quick shop going to get your Coke and punches you in the nose, you have 30 seconds to press your button there and catch that lead, what led up to that particular incident. The other thing about the pre-record thing, this camera is also activated by some automatic activations. So for example, we've got this tied into our emergency equipment switch in the car. So if we activate the patrol car's lights and respond to an emergency, they don't have to worry about turning on their camera. The camera in the car comes on, the camera on the body comes on. So traffic stops, emergency responses, they're thinking about other things. Maybe we don't want them to think about that, but we want those interactions and those responses recorded. The other thing about this, which is kind of neat, and this was, when we did test and evaluation, this feature didn't even exist, but when the product eventually was released to us, it did, and it was hopefully perfected, but it has gunshot detection. So that's not only if the officer themselves fires a firearm, but if a firearm is detected or a gunshot is detected within a reasonable radius of the camera itself and can be heard on this microphone, it's going to automatically turn on the camera. Because if something happens over here while I'm in the parking lot at bar close downtown and it detects a gunshot, I'm not going to be thinking about pressing start on my camera. I'm going to be trying to figure out where that came from, what to hide behind until I can assess what's happening. So we really like the gunshot automatic turn on for these cameras. So that's a little bit about kind of the product itself. A couple things that you may be interested in as far as policy. These cameras, as I said, are issued to everyone that has law enforcement power. So whether you're an administrator, a detective, a school resource officer, or a patrol officer, you're going to have one of these assigned to you and available to you. So if we put you out in uniform, put you out on an assignment where it's advantageous to have this, you will have this available as a member of our department. Some of our non-uniform people, we believe that this is still valuable in the day-to-day. So for example, investigators oftentimes will ask people to come back to the police station to sit down for a formal interview. Sometimes there's some resistance to that. Sometimes it's just advantageous to conduct a short interview in the field. Previously, those weren't recorded. They weren't recorded in audio. Instead, an officer may take some notes and things like that, but this may give us an additional resource for those investigators in the field to conduct short interviews. This isn't the formal interrogation that one would expect for, say, a 3-hour interview of a shooting or something. We wouldn't do that using this. We'd still use those formal interview rooms so that we could sit down and have other resources available, but this allows some field interview to be caught on camera so that everybody can kind of see and hear what occurred. As I sort of touched on, our expectation is all officers that respond to calls for service will turn on this camera before the arrival. So they'll acknowledge their call, go to their car. As they're driving to their call. If the emergency lights are not on, this isn't automatically activated, but we're telling them to turn it on while you're driving to your call. They get out of the car, they make contact with whomever, that call transpires. It may take 2 hours for that call to end. From the time that they contact somebody, will stay on a domestic, do their interviews, maybe make an arrest, go to the jail, and then the camera remains on until such time that the officer is done with that call. They turn their camera off. We have a little system where they have to go in and enter the case number and the type of call. Type of call is tied to how long we're going to retain that recording, which is very important to us. And then that particular call can end. If an officer has to, in sidebar, go talk to their supervisor or something, there's a mechanism for that as well where we say, I'm going to turn off the camera to consult my supervisor. This is, again, non-urgent, non-emergency, not a lot of stress type things. But we have some things in place for the ability to turn off the camera if need be, but otherwise it runs throughout the call. Any self-initiated calls as well. So if I'm going to go on foot patrol downtown, I'm not going to run the camera the entire time. Interactions like this, not going to run the camera. Just meetings, day-to-day type interactions. However, if something were to become heated, we'll say in this environment where there was something where I might have to switch into a law enforcement role, the expectation is the officer then can self-initiate that call, turn the camera on so that the contact is recorded from that point. We felt that it was important, and there's been a lot of discussion about our assistance with other agencies, to include federal agencies. so we get a lot of questions about, well, when ICE comes to town, what are you doing? Are you helping them out on the street? Are you running people? What are you doing? And most of the time, we're the uniformed presence standing next to the non-uniformed federal people that are doing whatever it is that they're doing. They don't usually tell us they're coming to town. They don't usually tell us what they're doing. But sometimes maybe a business owner will call and say, we got these people here that are asking questions and they say that they're from ICE and we want the police to come out here. In that instance, if we're called to respond to that situation, our officers are going to record our activities on that particular call. We touched on a little bit about the day-to-day interaction of, do you have to announce in every situation that you're recording, and what are those expectations that the public may have for that? And really, to make it where you have to always announce everything that you're doing as far as interacting with a law enforcement officer before you start that, that's not very practical. So the expectation is, if we're on a call, we're going to be recording that. We want the public to know that. There are still, like I said, some exceptions where we might want to turn the camera off. Those could be calls where we're co-responders for medical calls. So at times we'll go in, we'll find a partially clothed person who's having a medical situation. If the need for privacy outweighs the law enforcement need to record that interaction, you can turn the camera off and should turn the camera off, in my opinion. So a few outliers there, but we want to make sure that you all know that there's some discussion about that. And then somewhat lastly is we get questions about how is the video going to be accessed, or what are the rules about people that want to view body-worn camera video. A couple years ago it was more confusing. We had very little guidance from the state in that regard. But as time went on, not being the first to this game, we got some clarification in that. And in general, the person who's the subject of the recording, if they want to see a copy of that, so if we have a pedestrian check and somebody maybe contacts Sergeant Ernst and says, I have some issues with the contact with that police officer, and not only do I want to talk to the Office of Professional Accountability about this, but I'd like to see the video. That person, within 20 days of making such a request, we shall show them that recording. Any parent or legal guardian of a juvenile that we have a contact with, where that contact was recorded, same situation. We're going to show that video to that parent or guardian so that they can see the interaction. Same thing goes for an error at law. If, for example, if the individual who's the subject of the video is deceased, and an attorney comes forth and wants to see that video, again, that's going to be something that's shared, as is the attorney who's defending somebody or representing somebody in an action. If they come in and they want to see that video, we will show them that video. And that is all outlined in a subsection of the Kansas Open Records Act, so that gives us some guidance.
Clarification, when you said show, is it show or share?
It is show.
So they have to come into a black room and
Correct.
see and go.
Correct. So they would come down to the law enforcement center, and we'll have a room off to the side with a larger TV so that people can come in and we'll let them sit down. They're not entitled to copy it, yes, distribute it, all those things, but they are, and do sometimes come down. And we have that with our in-car camera system. So occasionally people will ask for that, and I oversee the records division. So we set that up, make that available to them, and body-worn camera is going to be very much like that as well. I've done a lot of talking. That wasn't the goal. I'm here to answer your questions if you have any.
So of course, how does that play in for us if need be?
Good question. Should have covered that. That was my intent. So one of the things that we've built into our internal policy is that this type of video is going to be shared with a number of other groups, to include this group in the same fashion in which we would share video in like an in-car camera system. So if there is a complaint that is race-based or something along the lines of bias, a complaint is made and this group investigates that, that is very likely something that this group would be able to see in an executive session type setting.
that
Correct me if I'm
fit our
wrong.
scope of
Yeah.
what our responsibility is? Yeah, okay.
Makes
Because,
total sense.
Good question, thank you. Sorry I missed that.
As far as policy goes, you said it's policy that every officer have it.
sworn officer,
Every sworn officer have it.
sorry.
When will that start, and what's the enthusiasm in the department?
Enthusiasm. You know, we thought that there would be a pretty significant pushback when we first started these discussions. The interesting thing was that when we did the test and evaluation and asked for volunteers, we had lots of volunteers. And then when the volunteers went out and did this and walked around, there was one that shared an incident that said, the very night after I turned my camera in, I had this deal and I was accused of doing X, and if I would have just had my camera, this would have all been clear. Those stories get shared. I mean, this really has a lot of support. Now, I won't tell you that it's all wonderful in the sense that one of the things that we have to do in, like a DUI investigation, if that investigation is recorded on an in-car camera system and we're going to write a report about it and we're talking about, well, how many steps forward and how many steps back did the person take during the field sobriety test, we should be reviewing our video and making sure that our notes match the video and so on and so forth. So it creates another burden of, we should go back and review those videos as we prepare our reports. We had a similar concern with the district attorney's office because they said, do you realize how much more information you're going to be giving us and how much more each of our prosecutors as we prepare for case review is going to have to go through? They even had a staff request, as did we, to add additional staffing just to be able to process, review, handle the additional video that's associated with this. But in the end, I believe the work product is going to be better both for the police department and for the district attorney's office.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
So all officers will wear it right here?
Yes, so in general, we talked about a location which is generally in the center of the body. Other people have said if you wear it down a little bit lower, if you're doing something with your hands, it's a little easier to see what's going on. So we're going to have to kind of play with that a little bit. Personally, I like the appearance of it being in the center of your body. I saw somebody else kind of wearing it down here, and I thought, well, that kind of looks strange. But in policy, and Chief Burns shared some of this from his previous department, he said some people would say, well, the policy says you just have to wear it. So they'd wear it up here and it would point at the sky. And it wouldn't catch anything. You go, really? People would do that? And so he kind of had some experiences to share with what he had from his previous department. But again, generally the center of the body where it's got a good view forward. We looked at other things that mounted on glasses and did other. There's advantages and disadvantages to that. The good thing is, you know, if I turn my head over here to look at something, the video changes over here. Whereas right now, if I turn my head over here to look at something over here, my video is showing straight ahead. But the glasses fell off all the time. They were more fragile. Things would break. There was wires that had to connect between the two that would get disconnected. So this in general is how it's going to be worn. Some people wear an external vest carrier, so if they're a plainclothes officer, they wear this vest that kind of comes over that has all these pockets and says police on the front and back. They'll have it in some location mounted on the front of their body where hopefully they have a clear view to the front. And to come back to your question, I realized I didn't answer. I believe you asked when they're going to go out.
Yeah.
So next week, in fact, all of next week with the exception of Monday, we've got Axon is coming in to do the technical installations. We've got to install some equipment in the car, in the building downtown, and then we've got to sign out each one of these cameras electronically to the officers. So that's Tuesday. Wednesday and Thursday is the bulk of the department. So we're going to get through patrol, administration, detectives, and hopefully get all those people through several hours worth of training. The training is going to cover the operation of the camera, how it works, how to upload things to the system, classify them, but we're also going to spend a good amount of time on the use policy so that our officers understand very clearly what the expectation is about the use. And then the last day is kind of some some other technical things that we're going to go through on how to do redaction with our front office staff if we have to do that. But pretty much a full week next week. And then after the officer has been issued the equipment and has received the training, some point during that week, we'll go live and they'll start recording their actions.
So next week.
Yep.
5 years, that's quite a project.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And as I've learned, there's advantages to grants and there's disadvantages to grants. We could have moved pretty quickly if we didn't have some things that were outlined by the grant. In other words, getting our policy formally approved through the Department of Justice. And then they bounce it back to you. And then again, you wait more weeks and then it comes back and you volley it back and forth. But in the end, we also had access to resources and documentation and technical advisors that would help us with that, help us with product selection. I think even though this has taken longer than we wanted it to take, the waiting wasn't necessarily bad. I think we ended up with a better product. I think we've seen some evolution in case law and statute, and even some kind of things have shook out in the court of public opinion about whether this is a good thing or bad thing. And I say court of public opinion, that's in the public realm as well as in the law enforcement realm. And we think this is a positive for the community and for the officers. So.
You learned how to write a grant.
No more grant writing. I had a commissioner ask me about that today, and I said, no. We may have landed one, but I still know nothing about writing grants.
I can find the information, but where is Axon from?
That's an excellent question.
Well,
I'm not sure I know where
they're
they're.
from Arizona, and that's where they're from.
I believe they are. So Taser and Axon are kind of, I believe Axon is the parent company of Taser.
Okay, Taser, Axon.
But when I see communications from them, I'm also seeing international contact stuff. So I guess I know less about the parent company and kind of where they're originally from. They did start though with the Taser device and kind of expanded from there.
Thanks, Trent.
Sure.
Any other questions?
Real quick, so
Yes.
what is your storage plan? You guys are going to be generating a lot of data.
Oh yes.
So how are you
So-
gonna handle this one?
One of the things that as you start to look at pricing and you start to look at storage, when we built this out and had an internal plan to manage storage, I'm like, I think we can do this. Our IT guys said, I think we can do this. And then we started looking at retention periods and how much we're going to be expected to record. Do you only record critical events or do you record all events? And then how long are you expected to store them? And what happened to Axon's excitement, we had to go with an unlimited storage plan because that was the predictable way to manage cost. So Axon tells us that we can store an unlimited amount of body-worn camera footage in their system while we're their customer. Which brings apart if you ever break from Axon, then they'll say, well, you can download all your stuff, but where are we going to put it? That's a lot of stuff. So right now we have an unlimited plan with them.
I would say
It's all
too,
cloud-based.
anybody for the average consumer can find a way to quickly transfer data, like large police videos, because sometimes it takes hours to put on any sort of media. I think they would be in for a gold mine, because I bet it's across all sorts of industries. If you have a fairly involved case with a lot of police dash cam in it, you have to plug it in to get it onto a hard drive. It'll take hours to transfer over.
Wow.
Sure.
So even though we have all this great top technology that can capture all this data, the movement of the data still takes quite some time.
Yeah,
And I'm sure there's things probably, Microsoft, they do it really quick. It's probably really expensive too, so.
what's nice with the system that we have now while we're Axon customers is we can disseminate data and pick like 3 different videos and then who we're going to send it to in the district attorney's office, and it sends them a link. So we're not actually sending data, we're just sending a link.
Makes sense.
And then they go right up to the cloud, they can retrieve it for a given period of time, save it if they need to. It's a very neat system. And so, yeah, the cloud-based solution was where we landed.
Thank you.
Anything else?
I know that you mentioned that it was, you guys estimated it was 467, and then when you started to actually do the math, it was way more than that. What was the total cost? I don't remember you saying that.
Well, over a 5-year period, it came out to about $1.26 million, I believe, from memory. So the way that they had things priced out, they wanted, many of these companies want you to enter into a 3-year plan or a 5-year plan, which kind of makes sense in a way too, because you want to make sure that you don't buy something for a short period of time, have a huge upfront investment, and then have to restart the process at year 3. So that cost will cover all the upstart costs. It'll cover all the cameras and equipment. It covers all the unlimited storage and those ongoing costs. So you have the upfront cost, which is essentially the city plus federal match of $462 in year 1, and then you have years 2, 3, 4 that are all at about $200,000 per year for the storage and refresh. At year 3, whether we need it or not, and whether technology has changed or not, they will upgrade our camera system, so we'll end up with new equipment. Much like nobody would want to keep an iPhone for 5 years, because 5 years later it's going to look tremendously different. So that was an advantage to us as well, that we would get an equipment refresh somewhere near halfway point.
And the management of that program is handled externally with the company that owns the body cameras or that manufactured the body camera? Like the management of so the storage, that's handled by them, and then the person, so there's not someone who's in-house who's an officer who's managing that program?
Yes, no.
Okay.
So all the whiz-bang technology, all the security for our data is managed by Axon. So they take care of that piece of it. They provide software, utility software for us. They will continue to update for us to do back-end management of our data. There will be, and there is, we have one IT employee that we had to add on the police department side to manage that data. So he will manage that. We have systems to be able to tell whether or not officers are properly going in and classifying videos. There's a whole bunch of accounting things that we can run, and he will be doing the lion's share of that. And then reporting that back out to supervisors. So if we need to talk to officers about the way they're using the system or not using the system, we'll have that technician that'll kind of tell us how things are going.
One final question.
Yes.
So the IT employee that you have to hire is included in the 1.26 million, or is that an extra cost that's outside of that?
That was an extra cost that was put in as part of the 2017 budget request. And we knew that we weren't going to start that program first thing in 2018, so it became a mid-year addition. So in 2018, half of his salary was paid because we hired him in July, and then we had him through 2019. So he helped significantly with this project.
Awesome, thank you.
Sure. Well,
I may have missed what, I want to dovetail on what you said, my question to that, but I also may have missed it, so, because I was sitting here thinking about my question. So talking about budget, and you use the word sustainability, so sustainability certainly of the product and the use of it, but what about sustainability in your budget? Not only with regard to personnel operations and how you manage the information and all of that. You have to pay for a cloud, perhaps, maybe not. Maybe the city has one for you. I don't know. But the other thing is, what about replacement operation
Sure.
in terms of fully operational with regard to maintenance or whatever?
Sure. So this big package that they put forth for this 5-year contract really covers a lot of that. Upfront cost, startup cost, we have a lot of those built into the first year. Those $200,000 ongoing costs are for storage, it's software support and health of the system itself. Again, somewhere about mid-year, start of year 3, we get an equipment refresh. So some of our equipment, both infrastructure and the cameras themselves, will get replaced, so we won't have that as a new cost. And as we put this forth and talked about budgeting for ongoing years, we had to make a budget request with the city. So we came back and said, this is what we anticipate as our ongoing cost per year. And we had to request that be added into our budget for ongoing years. that type of number can't be just absorbed by our operating budget. So we had to have the discussion about it, and quite frankly, I said, unless the city is thinking about this and wanting to budget for that expenditure for the next 4 years beyond the initial purchase, if you're not willing to do that, then let's not spend the money, because it's not a good investment.
Which leads me to my next question, and that is, so what's the intent? What do you hope to achieve as a result of having body cameras? I mean, is this an issue of justice? I'm a macro thinker.
Sure.
So is this to ensure justice for all, in a sense? And is that how important it is to the department? And when I say important to the department, then that answers the question of, making sure it folds into the budget going forward, and that's how important this is and valued by the department. Does that make sense?
It does, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of that, as you examine it, depends on what lens you're looking at it from. Are you looking at it from his lens, who investigates Office of Professional Accountability? Are you looking from the lens of a member of the public?
Sure, and that was my other thing, is this about accountability? I mean, certainly, to me, a secondary approach would be, because if I'm an officer, it's like, oh, you're watching.
Sure.
Is this going to my personnel evaluation?
Sure.
That kind of, and what kind of compliance, policies do you have with regard to, what about somebody just goes rogue and says, I'm not doing it? I mean, how are they held accountable? Which really goes back to how important is this and what role does it play in the department?
Lots of questions.
Okay, sorry. Because
So-
those are important, I think, to us too.
Again, I think it depends on who's looking at it and
Sure.
what the big benefit is for it. Again, we have Office of Professional Accountability inquiries that are made on a regular basis. And we prefer to have the most information available that we have. We have a lot of information already. We've got cameras in the cars. We've got GPS that talks about where the car was at, how fast it was, how long it sat in a particular location. We have lots of good tools for the accountability piece. This is one that is different. It does have GPS on it. It does record the officer's interaction. They can't delete data from it. We've got lots of security pieces in there. So from an administrator's perspective, this is a good thing.
Good hard evidence,
It is.
Justice.
We've heard people say, we've heard prosecutors say, I want this so that we can build a better criminal case, so that we can defend a civil action. We've heard other people say, well, I only want it to watch the police. I don't want it to be something that can be used against me in a criminal case. It's just a recording of what occurred, and chips will fall where they may, in the sense that it'll capture hopefully, whatever's going on at the time, and it may be used for a number of different things. The other thing, this is just more or less an expectation anymore, I believe, for modern policing in any agency of any size. I think some people may disagree with that, but as we start looking at best practices for what we do, we start looking at the expectations that the community has of us. In our mind, this is kind of a win-win-win. It will do all of those things. And though sometimes people may say, well, that recorded such and such, I wish that wouldn't have recorded this. Well, yeah, I get it, but it's a recording. Is what it is. So.
And I'm sorry, I've got just one more quick little question, and
Sure.
that is that you're recording someone without their consent. So I'm going to assume the laws here protect that. There are statutes that protect
Yes.
that. So just wanting to acknowledge that. Yeah.
Yes, we're okay there, even in situations where we would have to go into a home for a domestic.
Yeah.
And I know that's kind of a controversial thing with some, but basically, and Maria can of course correct me if I'm wrong, she doesn't hesitate for that sometimes. But basically, if I'm lawfully present somewhere, then my camera generally is as well. We've had conversations though with Lawrence Memorial Hospital, for example. I may be talking with you about something, but these other patients that are moving about in the emergency room, they're not real thrilled about those other people being caught on camera. But the good thing about that is we have the law that says that this isn't going to be given out to people just based on mere curiosity that they want to see what was captured on an officer's body camera. And the other thing is, we've brokered some less formal agreements with physicians and other people that had questions about this, and we said, look, again, if a privacy concern outweighs the legitimate law enforcement need to record, turn it off. So,
One last question, maybe stupid, I've been thinking about this is stupid, but how many pounds of force does it take to like jostle that or make it like move from position?
I don't know. I'll let you
I actually want to like just go and like, but like how many pounds of like, if you're like,
literally, I'll let you
Let's
pull
see.
it off. I'll let you pull it off.
you can't, okay, that was like really kind of weak.
It moves around, but
Oh, there you go.
it can come off. This is not a,
Okay.
you know, and yet at the same time, we've seen things like this radio. Somebody will
Yeah.
grab this and they'll be able to literally pull me around like a ragdoll until something breaks off. The cord will break, the snap will break. I mean, these are not infallible, but this is so much better than some of the first ones that we tested. I mean, they would literally fall off as you're getting out of your car, the thing falls on the ground, and you're, oh, that's not good. So
And I'm guessing that's pretty durable, like the car could probably run over that. It'd be fine.
it
I'm not
passes.
gonna try that one.
I'm not gonna try that one, I'm asking like it's like the,
You want to know?
Actually, I guess
it's like
it's
how
yours.
durable it is, 'cause like
So-
it's gonna go into like how easily, how much it's gonna be
Sure.
replaced.
This is where I'm probably not going to be able to do the specs justice, but there's some military specs that have to do with vibration, droppability, dust,
Okay.
other things. Again, now I'm wading into an area that I
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
speak to very well, but we like this. We believe that this is a rugged product, and time will tell. But
Kurt, what if you're in a short interview, recording's going, they invoke their rights?
sure,
Do you have to turn it off?
invoking the rights doesn't
Doesn't
have
matter.
much to do with the recording.
Okay.
It has more to do with what we're going to do action-wise as far as continuing to interrogate
Right,
somebody.
yeah, I understand, but I just wondered how that was for policy and all, as far as keeping that running.
Right. Actually, I think most attorneys, defense attorneys would probably want the recording not to cease.
Yes.
They want to
Well,
see,
that's
did we
true.
continue to ask them questions or did we stop?
Yeah,
So,
run it, just keep running.
sure.
Well, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, Captain.
Sure.
Very informative. Okay, next on the agenda then, quick updates, and that would be from, regarding the Citizens Academy.
It'll be very quick.
Sure.
Essentially, it's kind of been delayed indefinitely. They mentioned some late spring dates.
Okay.
It really, you said, it's not a matter of not wanting to do it, is the training unit staff is tasked with putting this together. They are currently, traditionally, leading up to about 4 years ago, we run one academy a year. They're now running back-to-back academies, which is a big machine to get going. It's not just showing up daily. It's onboarding 12. I think our next academy starts on Monday. We have 12 new officers, to include also then 5 deputies are going to be in that class. One bigger class we've had in a while. But anyway, so it's not a lack of desire. It's just really a lack of priorities, and that's getting new police officers on. We're
Right.
kind of, it's a little bit of exaggeration, but we're kind of losing them as quickly as we're hiring them. And so that's where we're at today. It's a highly repetitive cycle right now.
Right, and I think we heard about that from the chief at the last meeting, I believe, too, so.
We'll keep you
It's good news that we got 12 people though, and I'm
Yeah.
sincere about that. That's actually a fairly high amount.
Recruitment
So-
was an issue, yeah.
I have a question, this might be dumb as well. When you, like, you're saying you're like losing them as quickly as you're kind of training them, which I know is probably
That was a bit exaggerated.
hyperbole, but at what point do you get your return on investment? Like, if you hire a police officer and they like do 5 years, is like worth your time versus like if they only like last for like a year and a half, then like you lost on it? Like, what's your return on investment when you know that you got at least something out
You
of
know, and I
it?
don't know if this is kind of like this old lore within the department, but everybody's always kind of said 5 years. Or I've
Okay.
also heard the number that like it costs $200,000 to train an officer. In my opinion, it's probably more than that now. That's what I heard when I first started, so of course with inflation. But it's kind of ideal if you can get 5 years, is you're doing good. And so, yeah, that's,
Okay.
you know.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, updates, some carryover from the last meeting, maybe? Any questions? Okay. All right. If not, I do have one thing. I'm just I'm forecasting, what kinds of things, we have an annual report due in July, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and in that, have there been any reports that have been issued or submitted? I mean,
There's not any appeals because those would have been coming to you. So that triggers that. But the annual report that you all approved for the last year in January, and January is the time that you take that up because the code requires that to be submitted to the commission. I think it's August 1st.
right.
And that dovetails very well with the reporting that the police department does already to the state. So it kind of enables us to put all that together. And so more or less it was a summary of the board's activities, which of course for that year was mostly organizational and your own training that you were going through. So this year we'll just try and summarize the different actions of the board for you. And we always give you a draft and then you're free to add to it, however. So at your next meeting in April, we'll have a couple items. Again, as I mentioned, we'll ask Sergeant Rhodes to attend to talk about the outreach for 2019 and then the plans for 2020. We'll also talk about this ranking issue for LGBTQ communities, and I'll have a report about that. And then in July, there are a number of kind of annual things that you all need to do. So I think that was certainly the annual report and hearing about the police department's report to the state and that kind of thing.
Okay.
So I see in our minutes that from last year's chair's report, we should have carved out some recommendations. How can we do that? What's the process? What do you suggest? See, there's the 1, 2, 3, 4th one. Mentioned that it's good for the board to have.
Right.
I think that's completely in your purview.
Right.
Whether you want to have additional discussions about what was submitted.
Absolutely. And in addition, I would like, thinking about the timeline for the year with quarterly meetings, and knowing that there's the expectation of this annual report, I'm just wondering, and open it up to everyone to talk about what kind of training would you like to see or presentations, in this year in terms of the meetings that we're going to have April, July, and in the fall.
For April, I would like an update from Amber as far as where you're at with that. Give you a little bit of time.
An update on what? I'm sorry.
On an update on the LGBTQ position,
yeah.
which is new.
This might be kind of just more fun. I did have an idea, maybe in October, if the building is far enough along, we could go to the building, the new building, the new police facility. Now, mind you, I speak this not knowing exactly the state it's going to be in, and I believe it would be enough where we can walk through and go, this is general, you'll get a general grasp. So, just a thought. Admittedly, that's kind of just be fun, maybe. So,
I don't even know the anticipated
it's supposed to
completion.
be basically, when I say move-in ready, it's not where I could go sit in my desk in December, but we could start to move my desk in December, if that makes any sense.
So it'll be a building.
It'll be built, it's ready for occupancy in December, but, so even in October, it ought to be fairly far along, identifiable, and kind of be able to explain, but it's just something fun. If not, we can even wait till next year, when it's all done, and you can come to the grand opening or whatever, but.
On process, can I make a suggestion is, I know last year the chair made a report, but this year, can we do it, plan and build it into a discussion, so when it goes,
Into
the people have already, the
It's
board
not
has
It's not a
already said
surprise.
yes.
Yeah, it's not a surprise.
Sure,
Because
absolutely.
then you have your action items pulled out also. Because unfortunately, we haven't been able to pull out much from Tony's.
Sure, absolutely. Thoughts on that? How do you recommend?
So we should carve out some time in the next meeting, I would say,
Okay,
to see, because I'm I'm looking at stepping out after July, so July is when you have to turn it in, right?
Yeah, no, I agree, I think that's a good idea, and make it inclusive of the overall annual report.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you want to discuss priorities of the board for the next year? Is that?
Yeah.
Something like that, yes.
And the other thing, it might be just to have a conversation among ourselves in terms of generating.
What happened
other
right, what didn't
resources
we?
we already know and have in the community that we can provide.
And as you put it down, you are helping the next group.
Absolutely,
Because some of us will step up.
yeah. And I think it might be helpful to know the work that we may be already doing, because I think there are things that we are doing in our own lives, civically, right? And maybe even professionally, right? That we can share among ourselves to think about and then you hear some of that, to think about ways that you might consider accessing communities through the folks that we may be representing one way or another, or not, or just be aware of. Does that sound like something we might want to do?
Yes, and I think actually the topics that we already thought about for April will lend themselves really nicely to that
Okay,
discussion,
good.
so we can definitely add that.
Okay, that sounds good. And that'll address that issue too, so,
Because
yeah,
I'm thinking about next year's.
absolutely.
They should have something running.
Mhm. Sounds good. Okay, anything else, or any other agenda items or issues that you want to put on the next agenda? Just email them to you.
I think it helps amongst the
For us.
group for you all to kind of say, these are kind of the items that we'd like to discuss. And then just kind of be aware, we haven't had an appeal yet, but when you do, it may bump all of your other items for that you kind of plan for that meeting.
I am keeping my fingers crossed another 6 months. That's it.
Yeah,
Me too,
we never
but-
know.
But, in fact, I thought about that when I said, hey, do we have anything we need to talk about or address? And how would we know that, and how best can we prepare for that? I mean, I'm not saying that I have to be ready to do it immediately, but in an anticipatory way.
Well, I think that, there's some time frames that somebody has to make an appeal from hearing from the Office of Professional Accountability.
14 days.
14 days.
Yeah, we might review that.
And there's some time frames, but I don't anticipate us springing something on you that you haven't.
You would probably see it on the next agenda, like recess an executive session for an appeal.
Yes.
I mean, that would probably be your clue. And admittedly, even if one came in a day or two before a meeting, the appeal would probably get pushed back to the meeting after that. I can't say that for certain. I guess that would have to be discussed.
Well-
Would we need, for time purposes, would we need to schedule a special session for that?
That could be possible.
Well, and actually, that's why we've identified these 2 meeting times every time. So-
Yeah.
And I think that's good.
So if you end up checking the agenda and it says, go into executive session or something along those lines, then I would mentally plan on that second meeting time
To do
unbeknownst the breadth of information you're going to have to review. It could all be accomplished in the first meeting, but I guess we don't know.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's-
The ordinance doesn't provide a deadline for this board to come back with its findings.
Okay.
The only deadline is for the complainant to file the appeal within
Okay.
14 days, but then when it comes to this body, there's nothing that says you have to get it done within a week of receiving it, so.
But there are there would be some work that the attorney's office would need to work on if there would be necessary redactions and documents and things like that you all would visit. So I think there would be some appropriate lead time for us to know whether we will have an appeal on a certain agenda or not.
Yeah, it would be helpful for me to just have a refresher of those processes, so we're not caught off guard if it does happen, because I feel like it would be, not caught off guard. I mean, we've had some great training here, but just a small little refresher, what do we do? I'd like to be better prepared.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we could do that at the July meeting,
Okay.
and maybe just have that be kind of a part of the routine in July.
At least once a year.
I would even think it might be wise, just a food for thought, is more these process, but sort of like a retrainer on the process prior to going into the executive session. Instead of trying to just remember, it's obviously some sort of perishable skill. We need a refresher and just saying, hey, this is the process you can expect to take in a review, and then going into your review. But that, just food for thought if you want to do it that way.
No, I think that's good. Yeah.
Kind of on a different note, is there, I don't think there is, but on an annual basis, is there any required training that we are supposed to be?
It's, the code says that there's all the training that a new board member does.
Right.
So all of you have completed that. I think that refreshers are great, and the code also talks about any other training that the city manager might think would be helpful. And I think also as you all have these discussions with the board, if there's things that you think would be helpful, like your discussion of, hey, it'd be great to have a refresher once a year. Those are all appropriate.
Yeah. I guess I would ask, since there's not going to be an academy for kind of an indefinite time, you know, we had all talked at one point about getting some additional training. Some of you mentioned on the investigative side, some about use of force, even though we've been through some of that. You know, is there any that we may want to consider? Any other concerns?
Use of force we did, right?
Yeah, we
shared-
did. We had,
Yeah.
They helped us with use of force.
yeah, we had quite a bit of training.
So investigative side is the only one which is.
Do we want to do
Because you
investigative?
just, you know, it's obviously better to be prepared than to not be, you know, and
Yes.
have an uncomfortableness of what you're going to be
Yeah, I
prepared
agree.
to discuss. And
You mean investigations, like how investigations done?
yeah, they had,
Internal investigation or a criminal investigation? Because I've given, actually, I think a couple times over an internal one. I don't remember reading it.
no,
Not the,
not an internal, well,
No,
probably on
I-
the criminal.
I think, yeah,
And I
probably
guess-
criminal.
Do you have a specific, I mean, you know, that's kind of, what are you looking for? And this way I can help, instead of, what'll happen is we say that, then I have to go back, but this way if I can have kind of specific direction, I can relay that to whoever might provide the training, and they can know what to talk about.
Right. Yeah, I can't answer really to that because I wasn't asking for it, but I know you all were talking about that.
I
Feeling
recall
like
that.
yeah.
What are your thoughts? Training on,
Had the training once.
we've had the internal.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
this
that's-
topic of criminal investigation
Accountability.
is extremely broad, and I mean, you're gonna have, but if you have an interest in a certain topic of investigations, I mean, even on food for thought, but frankly, I would be very boring. You come in and say, well, we go talk to somebody, they said this happened, we go talk to the other person, we identify the evidence, but if it's specific to a curiosity of financial crimes, or, which, I don't, you know, some sort of angle that you're looking for. I'm actually trying to make it interesting.
They stop and frisk.
Yeah, what about hate crimes?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, I'll see if we have somebody that
Yeah,
can provide
yeah.
that.
I think
That's-
that would be helpful.
because you have shared with us the process you use, so we go, we talk, everything that you, some of the things that you are mentioning, you have already shared with us.
And, yeah,
In the
so
past.
I'll
But
I'll
hate
try to
crime
identify
as
somebody that
specific, we haven't, yeah,
present on that.
definition and then,
How about that? Does that work?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I just remember you all talked about it.
I think that's down our alley.
I think we talked in general about investigations, but I don't know if we got
Yeah,
really
that's-
specific, and I could see how different types of crimes are different. So, yeah, I think hate crimes would be interesting and relevant.
Yes.
And I do want to acknowledge, also take some time to acknowledge that Nathan, okay, that you took the training outside of our meeting times,
Yes.
and I want to acknowledge and thank you for that, okay?
Oh, you all did it.
So did Brooklyn as well.
Yes.
And they both got on the use of force simulator.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
And Nathan
Oh,
got
That's good.
shocked, he also got shocked if he was, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Okay, thank you.
I
Because
escaped the shock.
I just remember going through the training and like the first meeting being shell-shocked. What? What do I have to know? What do I have to learn? That's a lot of information to cover. And so the fact that you did it outside of this meeting and we had the luxury of having it during these sessions, I appreciate that and wanted to acknowledge it. So thank you too. Yeah, absolutely. You've been here so much, I think you feel like you were here from the beginning, but that's not true.
Yeah,
So
that's
anyway, I
right.
wanted to do that. So any other items to discuss?
Madam Chair, if you can make a formal motion to cancel the meeting next week.
I do.
And there's a motion right there.
Yes.
Okay, second?
Second, anybody?
Oh,
Okay, second. All those in favor signify with an eye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. And then our next meeting is April 9th then.